There's a man in the hotel who claims to have written the words to "I Want to Hold Your Hand." We'll see him in court.
Ringo, do you have any political affiliations at all?
No, he doesn't smoke. I don't even smoke.
Is that what type of cigarette is that? Is that a roll your own?
It's one of these, but it don't work so well. He said an American accent.
Did you ever think you would become a big star? And these questions are really nonsense because at the time you never know what's going to happen. But now that you are in the limelight throughout the world, do you ever take a backward look, and remember when you were first starting out, and does it give you sort of a chilling feeling to know that you've become so popular and so famous and so well known?
Not really. Because all along the line we never expected to do anything. You know, we just plodded on and it just all happened, and so we took it in our stride. But when we look back at it, you know, it's funny. It just seems a big laugh. You know, all the lads, you know, sort of we've known each other for years.
Hello, welcome to episode 284 of Something About the Beatles, with returning guest Ivor Davis, UK journalist based in LA since the 1960s, and connected with the Daily Express, which, until this conversation, I did not realize he worked for Ray Connolly. Ray Connolly was his editor, and it gets me to thinking maybe I should have them both on the show sometime to reminisce about those days. I've had them both on separately, couple times talking about the Manson business, in as much as there's the whole White Album thing that most people know about, but he was there, having been the first journalist to visit Spahn Ranch and interview family members and get the story straight out of them about the preaching from the Beatles hymnal, as it were, that Manson did straight out of the White Album to his followers. But that is a topic we've well covered, and you are invited to go check out Ivor's books, including the most recent one, Manson Revealed, telling his story in covering that case. His was the first book written on it, and in fact was published while the trial was ongoing. And Bugliosi, the prosecutor, actually used a lot of what Ivor had uncovered and reported on for his prosecution of the Manson people. But about 10 years ago, he published a memoir describing his going on tour with the Beatles in 1964, embedded as a reporter from the UK to cover their 1964 American tour. And he was also around for the 65 tour as well, which included the meeting with Elvis. But for the 64 one, there was the meeting with Dylan, and we know what that led to in New York. But the book was published, The Beatles and Me on Tour. It's just been republished 10 years later for the 60th anniversary. And of course, this has been a topic broadly we've been covering this year. Various guests, various angles on the 60th anniversary of the world conquest by the Beatles. And there's more to come in the pipeline. In case you guys were wondering what the hell's been going on with the show for the last month, just a lot of catching up on things, a major project we'll be knowing about soon enough, as well as taping the next batch of shows. So we got a bunch in the pipeline. You've got that to look forward to, hopefully, and coming soon. As well as other things we've been talking about that have been sort of moving in a certain direction for this show in changing networks. More content, just to put it that way. The Beatles and Me on Tour 60th Anniversary Edition by Ivor Davis is massively enlarged from the original one. So if you bought the original book 10 years ago, this is bigger. There's more pictures, there is a Q&A section at the end, there is expanded research, more coverage of the tours and the people that he knew along the way. Of course, the Beatles and the peripheral characters, Brian, Mel, Derek, Neil, etc. So that was a big part of what we had to talk about in this conversation. I wanted to know, just give his general impressions on the people associated with the Beatles, as well as his takes on the Get Back film, Now and Then, and so forth. I'm glad to have him back. I also should mention, and we do talk about it a little bit in the show, his true crime book, which is also out this year, The Devil in My Friend, which was a true accounting co-written with his late wife, Sally. She had started the work on it, and he has finished it off. And it's about a family they knew, were good friends with, a neighbor, that there was a murder, took place in the 80s, a double murder as it happened, and how wrong you can be about somebody. We've all been there. And this is his account of the case and his own personal connection to it. And so that's another book you can check out as well. It has absolutely nothing to do with the Beatles. But The Beatles and Me on Tour absolutely does. And he describes it now.
There's a lot of new stuff, some fun stories. People ask me a lot of questions. It was a good excuse to bring it out again. You know what this year is. It's big, and it just never stops. Paul is on tour. Ringo's on tour. Ringo's birthday this week. I mean, it's just a non-stop fairground.
Right. The wonderful thing is it's not just for the first-gen fans or the people that were there. It's all these generations since, including myself, and then after me and these Gen X kids. Everybody is finding a handle on the Beatles, and it speaks to them exactly the same way. It's this joyous thing that makes you feel good, and it's celebratory, and it's uplifting. And the more the world sort of circles the drain, it's like the more it's needed. Yeah. So it's this gift that keeps on giving.
Well, last night I was in a meeting at my local temple, and the guy came up to me and said, "Have you seen Paul McCartney's photo exhibit?" So Paul McCartney has done, as you know, I'm sure, it started at the National Gallery in London. Mm-hmm. He saw it in New York last week. So Paul McCartney has resurrected his old out of focus pictures for a new book and a new exhibit. Well, there you go.
Yes. Just when you think you've seen it all and heard it all. So that's a great opening to a couple things I wanted to ask you about that since the last time we talked, we haven't had a chance to talk about. First is Peter Jackson's Get Back, and the second is the Now and Then release. So starting with the first, did you get through the Peter Jackson thing? You talk about both of these in the new expanded edition of the book.
Well, of course, I was in America at the time, but I think Peter Jackson did an incredible job. And I'm sure you agree. I mean, I think it runs for 6 hours or 7 hours and 40 minutes, 6 hours and 40 minutes. Yet everybody who's seen it says to me, wow, that really gives you an incredible insight. Was Yoko a pain in the you-know-where? Well, she was devoted to John in the film. And to see how the Beatles, the sort of nuts and bolts, produced their music was really an eye-opener. Mm-hmm. And Jackson is a brilliant filmmaker anyway, but he did a terrific job and brought in new Beatle fans. Some of the Beatles stuff in the studio, as you know, and as you know, other experts like you know, it was tedious and it went on forever. And then George walks out and then they have little fights and Peter Sellers shows up. So it's a real potpourri of fascinating film that we hadn't seen before. But the original guy,
Michael Lindsay Hogg?
Yeah, Lindsay Hogg did a terrific job because they dug up footage that Lindsay Hogg was not able to use in the original Let It Be, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Resurrect that. And the other thing, as we were talking about a moment ago, the Beatles do Now and Then. Paul is the genius behind that, to come up with an old John Lennon tape and then to put it together. And thanks to AI and all the rest of the stuff, you get them again. And the amazing thing last year, I think you correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, last year, Now and Then was top of the hit parade. Mm-hmm. With the Rolling Stones, was it Hackney, whatever it was called?
Hackney Diamonds?
Hackney Diamond. I mean, I grew up in Hackney, and so it appealed to me. Hackney Diamond, two old guys, bunch of old guys hitting the hit parade 60 years later. I mean, you can't make that up.
No, unbelievable. So when you saw Get Back, what I was wondering is, you're a guy that not quite 5 years earlier, you're embedded with them as a journalist, going on tour with them. And that's something we could talk about in a bit, but that's like the core of your book. You're a fly on the wall. You're with them in all these different situations as they're going across America. You're a witness to the dynamic between the four of them. And watching the Get Back film, now it's in the studio and sees guys not quite 5 years later, after Pepper, after they quit touring, they've sort of grown up, no more Cynthia in the picture, no more Jane Asher. This is where they are then. As you're watching it, did it give you any sense of how much things had changed, or were there things that were still sort of the same? And from the perspective you're seeing it now, 50 years later, is there any greater meaning you're drawing from it when you're watching these guys interact?
I think watching that film unveil in 6 or 7 hours, I forget, reinforced what I had seen in person a few years earlier. But don't forget, they had come a long way. I mean, this was their first American foray in 1964, 60 years ago this year. And they were babes in an American woods. And all of a sudden, you see these guys a few years later, they've established themselves. They're now kings of the road. And it's fun to see them negotiating with each other. I mean, Ringo is still behind the drums. And George, of course, in the film is shown to be petulant or annoyed or angry with John. John is his usual cheeky self, and Yoko is sort of tied at the ribs with him, won't move. And all these other personalities like Peter Sellers drop in, and it kind of adds to the legend, if you like.
Your chance to win a Fab-free Beatle. Send in 39 disc tops.
Wake up, Lennon.
Wake up, Lennon. It's about time.
What are we discussing at this moment? What's the
film.
And this is the
It's a documentary of how the Beatles worked.
It's spontaneous. It's a spontaneous documentary.
We feel we shouldn't keep it all to ourselves. We should spread it out, you know. We want to share with the world what we have, Peter, and this is what we have.
What we haven't.
No, this is we just sort of sit here and allow ourselves to be embarrassed about this time every day.
Oh, yes.
Number 9.
You're talking to the 9th best dressed male pop singer in the world, you know. No mean city. Yes. Look out, Tom Jones, I say. Over to you, Peter.
So the answer to your question is the change in that film footage was certainly discernible, not dramatic, just reiterated what I got, the glimpse I got of them back in 64. So it was the Beatles slightly older, and it was only slightly. They now were kings of the road, as I said, and they were having fun. Tedious. It went on to the early hours of the morning. They got a little bit PO'd with each other, as we saw. And as I might have mentioned a moment ago, George walked out and then he walked back in again. So it just reiterated. And I love to see Mal Evans doing the heavy lifting still, and Derek Taylor there. And it was like an old home week in a way, seeing these characters have walk-on roles in the film. That was about it.
One where everything was right, just like the last bit of my guitar solo. But remember the one before that we all said was all right?
Yeah, well, let's take a level.
We're always edit.
Yeah, I'm just getting on.
Edit? You're talking to the Boodles.
So you really going to try and get every number just as good as you can get. Sort of, that's the idea, is it?
Let's all rehearse it well, and that's true. One take, that'll be it, you know.
Yeah, right. Now, see, the thing is, we
again.
need another week to
Do
do
it
it.
again. Do it again.
And I'm glad you brought those two up because you do talk about them quite a bit in the book. Derek Taylor and Mal Evans.
Because there's nothing to it except that it's a lie.
Hope it doesn't come out about me beating up Maharishi.
No doubt Derek will have read it before he got in there and has sent them the telegrams and things.
Congratulations. Morning, Dennis. You see Michael House go today? Don't you think it's suable?
No.
What about the fisticuffs?
Yeah, none of that.
It didn't take place, right?
He said it did, didn't
No.
it? Oh, thanks.
You want to talk a bit about Derek and his importance to the Beatles, and I think it's in the Q&A section at the back of the book. You talk about how he sort of set the tone for Apple with his presence and.
Well, he did, but don't forget, Derek Taylor was a very early convert to the Beatles. Derek used to work for the London Daily Express, which is my newspaper, and I got very friendly with Derek, and he was smitten by the Beatles the moment he saw them in Manchester, wrote a rave review. Brian Epstein liked his rave review, and that's how Brian hired Derek. And of course, as you know, he wrote a book called Cellarful of Noise, which was Brian Epstein's biography. But Derek was a headstrong fellow, and he and Brian banged heads. So Derek was almost, people call him the fifth Beatle. I mean, they call everybody the fifth Beatle. from George Martin to Brian Epstein. So Derek Taylor was a brilliant brain. My only concern was I think he sort of drank himself to an early death, which is sad. But he was a witty guy, a great sense of humor. After he left the Beatles, he came to LA, tried to pour the magic oil on the Beach Boys and other groups like that. I forget so many other groups he worked for. And that's when I got to know him even more, because he used to hang out at Derek's house, and Brian Wilson was there, and all these people used to show up. Anyway, so Derek was a legendary character, and I'm surprised. Well, there have been a few books, maybe 2 or 3 books about Derek. So he was instrumental. He was always passionate. And then, of course, when he broke up with Brian Epstein, and then Brian Epstein brought him back, and he would call me from London and say, hey, we're doing this anthology. Do you want to do something on it? So Derek was a true believer till his very dying day. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing was I went to his funeral in Suffolk, and I was surprised that only George Harrison showed up. And I think the reason only George Harrison showed up was, number one, that Derek Taylor was like a twin for George Harrison. He was his favorite Beatle. And George Harrison showed up with Eric Idle from the Monty Python group. And the reason the rest of the guys didn't show up, I think, was because they didn't want to make a circus of the funeral. So that was Derek, a gem and really a genuine part of Beatle history, particularly after he went back and started being PR and the head of publicity and everything else at Apple Records in London.
So you got to know him pretty well in America. During that time he was on the outs with the Beatles, he left in a tiff with Brian pretty early on. What was it, 64, I think? Yeah,
over some stupid thing about, Brian came back to the hotel. I was at the hotel. We were at the airport, at Kennedy Airport. It was called Idlewild Airport at the time. And he said, you took my limousine. And then they got into a screaming match, and Derek resigned for the Beatles that night, and they went back to England the next morning.
Right. But during that time, he's basically really turning into a legend in L.A. for the reasons you describe and working with these other acts. Did he foresee a time that he would be reconnected with the Beatles post-Brian? Do you think that was in the cards for him, or it just happened that the Beatles recognized, hey, we love this guy, he's exactly what we need right now?
You've hit the nail on the head. I mean, he was joined at the hip to the Beatles. That was his life. As I say, he was his favorite with George Harrison, and years after he went back, he came and toured America with George Harrison on his own when George went out on his own. So I think Derek, his association with the Beatles is unstoppable and unbeatable. And I think he always wanted to go back. And when Brian said, come back, we want you back, all is forgiven, they kissed and they made up, because Derek knew where the bodies were buried in the Beatle history. Right. And Derek was very, very, very clever. He could tell you about it, but he kept the skeletons out of public view. And he was such a defender of the Beatles. He was passionate about them. I can't tell you. They were his life. I mean, they were his family. He had some lovely kids, and he had a lovely wife, Joan. But the Beatles were almost his kids.
That as long as the 4 of them are alive, then there still is a Beatle. There's no such thing as an ex-Beatle or a former Beatle or a retired Beatle, because the Beatles are something other than a pop group. I mean, many pop groups are broken up, but the Beatles are not a pop group. They're an abstraction, a sort of a repository for many things. So it's sort of like a pigeonhole in the sky that you can put something in and get an answer, and a sort of Beatles response to a situation. Do you understand what I mean? And I think that they fulfill a need in the media for something that's there, that's cheerful and human and rich and somehow invulnerable. So the Beatles, if the Beatles is alive as an idea, then I think all 4 Beatles will respond to that idea at some time or other and become Beatles again.
It's pretty amazing that he's somebody that is this colorful character in the Beatles' periphery that so many people know about through reading the books about. But it's like his life story really needs to be told properly, I think, because it was bigger than the Beatles, all the other stuff that he was...
Derek, when he came to America, I always thought it was funny, and that's when we hooked up again, based on our experiences traveling. everybody came to Derek and said, they didn't say, actually, give us your magic syrup or your magic formula, but what you did for the Beatles, do for us. And Derek did a great job with the Beach Boys and Buffalo Springfield and another group who I can't remember who came and went fairly quickly. Mm-hmm. But Derek loved LA. It's like it was nirvana for him. We used to go out for breakfast, and I'm not telling stories out of school, but we go out for breakfast to the Gaiety Delicatessen, which had a bar at 10 o'clock in the morning, and Derek would have 2 brandies and soda for breakfast. So, he got off to a flying start. And I know I am a very good friend with Chris Hillman of the Byrds. And Chris Hillman of the Byrds tells me wonderful stories about when they went over to England and Derek took them to meet the Beatles and made them comfortable with the Beatles. And he was a go-between, and his heart and his love with the Beatles. That was his life.
Right. You have any particular insight into why it was George that he bonded with so strongly?
That's a very good question because, to be honest with you, their personalities, I think their sense of humor, their very dry sense of humor brought them together.
Okay.
George was always his favorite. I'm not sure why. I think because George was the least flamboyant of the bunch, and Derek liked that. And Derek, as I said, became his personal PR, his pal, his family friend, his loyal, devoted person. Mm-hmm. And maybe, I don't know, it's a good thing because their personalities were not the same. George was, he was taciturn. He was, all the corny stuff about the quiet Beatle. He had a great sense of humor, and somehow he and Derek hit it off more than the rest of the guys. Because I think Derek felt there was, on the scheming level of 1 to 10, George was about a 3, Paul was 9, John was 9, and Ringo was about 4. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it appealed to Derek's down-to-earth sense of humor.
Interesting. So both of you guys ghosted for George. You doing the column that went out when you first got drawn into the Beatles circle, and Derek, I think, before you was doing one?
Yes, he did. Well, that's how, because I must say this. I said, why does George want to do a column? And then Derek said to me, well, Brian said, when we're on tour, it will give George something to do. In the light of what we're talking about, that sounds crazy. I mean, something to do on that tour. Nobody had something to do. It was crazy. The Beatles never knew which city they were going to. They never knew where they were. So why would George want something to do? So Derek started the column for the Daily Express, and then I was asked to continue it, which I did do. And it was a tough road to hoe because George didn't know me. It took a long time for George to get comfortable with me because of his personality. And finally we hit it off, but it took a couple of weeks to get to know George and get him to tell me things that I could put in the column.
Right. And what you describe in the book, it sounds like once the burden of this chore was done and you'd moved on from that, it was easier to get conversation out of him.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I see the film footage of George on the talk shows in America, this is a different guy. Believe me. In 1964, he didn't have a lot to say for himself. By 74, and by the time he was on all the talk shows in America,
Dick Cavett.
I mean, I couldn't believe this was the same guy. He was erudite. He could talk because he'd owed his own interest. He'd become a star in his own right, and that's what it needed.
A persona independent of the Beatles.
Yeah.
Sure.
Independent. Robert, that's the key thing. Independent of the Beatles. He was a star as George Harrison.
Well said. Now, tell me a little bit about your dealings with Brian Epstein.
Well, the interesting thing was that Brian Epstein and I got off very well. And I always tell the story that we were in New Orleans on Yom Kippur, the most sacred day of the year for Jews. And Brian and Derek knew I was Jewish. So Derek came to me and said, Brian wants to go to the synagogue on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, when he's supposed to fast and all the rest of it. So I set up for Brian to come with me to the synagogue. And then when I knocked at the door, Brian was not around, and I ended up going on my own. But the interesting thing was that Brian and I bonded a little bit on that because Brian was also hard to get to know. And then Brian and I had long conversation about the miserable time we had in the British Army. because in those days, those of a certain age had to spend 2 years national service. And Brian told me that he was miserable. I was miserable, but I stuck it out. So after about 6 months, Brian was released on, I think, mental or whatever they call it.
Right.
And he didn't have to do it. And so, we talked about, I said, well, you're right, Brian. It was a bit of a bloody waste of time. Except in my case, strangely enough, I was posted not to Hong Kong or Germany or any of those more exotic places, but to London, 15 minutes from my home. And I worked in a hospital in London. I met a guy called Roger Bannister. I was his secretary at the hospital. And so I got a lot out of it. And the other thing I got out of it, and I know this is not about the Beatles, was that because I was in the army, they gave me free tickets to see all the greatest shows in the West End of London. So I would go along to the NAFI or USO, I think they call it in America, get these free tickets, and it was open sesame to a poor kid, not a poor kid, I mean, not a working class kid, to get tickets to see the best on the London West End stage. So Brian and I, back to that, bonded on that situation. Yeah.
Amazing. What a great bit of circumstance for you in your military career.
Well, I mean, Robert, life is full of circumstance. I can't tell you, since this Beatle book came out and since I had a new murder book come out, people I haven't seen in 25 years called me and said, oh, we got your book and remember me and all that stuff. So it's kind of almost like open line to the rest of the world. Amazing.
Amazing, yes. And I should point out to listeners who might not be aware, when you talked about Roger Bannister, that is, of course, the same guy, was in 54, was the first man to break the 4-minute mile barrier.
Right, that's right. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. Roger Bannister became famous. He was a young doctor in the hospital where I worked. He and I used to do the rounds, and I was his secretary at the hospital in London. And he dealt with all these young military guys from England. And this is a bit off the Beatles, but it's a fascinating story. In the old days, they all went to Christmas Island, the British military, to watch the H-bomb tests.
Wow.
And a lot of the British servicemen came back with leukemia and other deadly diseases because they said that we were told when we were watching the H-bomb tests at Christmas Island, we were to turn our back and close our eyes. And that was it. They were within, radius of a half a mile of the explosion. So all these young men came in, and Roger Bannister and I used to go around the hospital ward with these dying young military men who had leukemia. Anyway, that's a bit off the point. So
Right, but it's interesting that they didn't have the precautions in place for radiation.
They didn't. It's almost, it's laughable, except it's tragic because a lot of these young men died.
Right. Well, in America at the same time, we had duck and cover.
There you go. Or get under the table.
Right. It'll save everything. Yeah. So what's interesting to me is, not to get too far ahead, but you relate in the book a conversation you had with John Lennon at the time of Mind Games, and specifically him talking about Brian. Now, everything we've seen including Get Back, but also in just different books and different statements they've made through the years, is they recognize the importance Brian had to their career and to them personally in terms of just kind of managing things, keeping things going, keep them all in check. And then once he died, what a loss they were at. And it was just borrowed time from that point on for them to operate as a band together without that sort of oversight. Did you get a sense in 64 of the importance of Brian to them and how they reacted to him or valued him?
Well, I think they valued him more than they made out at the time, because Brian knew everything. I mean, Brian was the guy that discovered them. Brian was the guy that said they would be bigger than Beethoven. Brian was the guy that also had passion and belief in their success. And they knew that. But even that, there was this, and Brian was kind of like the headmaster. He would tut-tut. He'd tell them off when they came off stage if they did things that he thought they shouldn't. And he was the one that cleaned them up from the Reeperbahn, from Germany, and put them in the suits. He had the vision to see what they could become. And yet the relationship with John Lennon closer to Brian, probably, because there's all these stories about John Lennon's wife, Cynthia, is expecting the baby. And where is John when she expecting the baby, Julian?
Right.
He is off on holiday with Brian. Oh, really? That's kind of weird. So there was this strange chemistry. And it was I think if I use the term a love-hate relationship, that doesn't indicate there's division, but they ran hot and cold on each other. I think it's pretty well established that they did. And John was such a cheeky bastard, loved to needle you, and he did needle Brian, and Brian finally got it. But anyway, so the relationship with Brian and John was very close. With the other three, probably.
You know that one friend who somehow knows everything about money? Yeah, now imagine they live in your phone. Say hey to Experian, your big financial friend. It's the app that helps you check your FICO score, find ways to save, and basically feel like a financial genius. And guess what? It's totally free. So go on, download the Experian app. Trust me, having a BFF like this is a total game changer.
Not quite as close as it was with John.
It was interesting to me to read what you describe in that 1973 conversation when you are connected with him in L.A. And he's separated from Yoko at that time. It's that period where he's with May Pang, as you describe. He's sort of reticent to talk much about the Beatles or the past or the breakup or any of that stuff. But what you describe is he really sort of unleashes this fury on Brian.
Brian was a nice guy, but he knew what he was doing. He robbed us, you know. He fucking took all the money and looked after himself and his family, you know, and all that.
Don't forget what had happened after the bust-up was that then Klein, who was Hollywood's arch bad guy, came in and took over.
Right.
And then, of course, that caused a huge division between the three of them. And Paul, they were in separate camps. Paul brought in the Eastmans, and Klein was John's choice. So I think, you know, when you look at Alan Klein and you look at Brian Epstein, Alan Klein was really in it for the money. You hate to speak ill of the dead, but that was Alan Klein's reputation.
Sure.
I mean, Alan Klein even worked with the Stones, and they thought he was terrific for about 2 weeks, and then they sued him. Anyway, so I think as time went by on that occasion with John, everybody ended up speaking about Brian with affection, including John, even though in the early days, they thought he was in it for the money. In the early days, he took a large chunk of their earnings, maybe 25%, I can't remember exactly, which sound a lot of money. But, you know, he created them, really, everything. So I always remember somebody telling me this about Brian. When George Harrison's parents heard that Brian Epstein was going to manage the Beatles, they said, and it shows you the mood of the country at the time, very good, because they said Jews are good with money. Right. I mean, that was the mindset in Liverpool in the early 60s.
I don't think it's changed.
Well, yeah, and they said, and this is also a joke really when you think of it today, they said not only is he good with money, but he has his own car. Wow.
Right. Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah.
Big time.
Showbiz. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to when you first connected with them and you're working for the Daily Express.
Yeah.
You're a couple years older than them. I don't know how much of a rock and roll fan you were at that time or if that stuff really connected with you. Going back, let's say, with Elvis. Was that something you were much into at the time, or was music not really a big part of your world?
To be honest with you, I got the assignment to do the Beatles, cover the Beatles and travel with them. I wasn't really a music writer. I was a young man growing up in England, like many did. Many kids grew up in England in the late 50s and the early 60s. I liked Bill Haley and his group, Billy Haley and the Comets. Somebody came to me, a friend of mine said to me, "You've got to hear this guy." I always remember that. He said, "I'm coming to my house. I've got his vinyl record." And I went to his house in London and he played me Blue Suede Shoes and Heartbreak Hotel. He said, "This guy is phenomenal." So that was how I knew about Elvis. And don't forget, back then, we didn't have radio in England or even television that played rock and roll music.
Yeah.
I mean, can you believe that? So the only way that we could listen to rock and roll music growing up, as the Beatles did in England in the 50s after the war, was on Radio Luxembourg. And Radio Luxembourg was a station in Europe that played rock and roll music, played all the hot stuff from America, from Elvis and all the rest of it. So That's the way we were educated. So it's a long-winded answer to a short question. I didn't know much about rock and roll. I couldn't tell you about musical instruments. If you ask me even, this guitar from that guitar, I can't tell you. But I liked certain music. Frankie Lane, I thought, was terrific. I don't think he was a rock and roll guy. And we can talk about the other people. Lulu was around. Anyway, so
prior to even connecting with the Beatles, they'd had obviously a few hit records out by that time. Was that anything that meant anything to you? Because you expressed in the book that when you got this assignment, it was with the expectation that this was a story of the moment and it wouldn't have legs, much less 60 years later you'd be talking about it. It was an ephemeral thing.
Oh, I mean, the point you just made, to think that 60 years later I would be talking about, I mean, it took me several decades to realize, I was on this incredible journey. Why don't I write about it? There were people that wrote about it earlier. I mean, Larry Kane wrote about it earlier, and more power to Larry. But, all of a sudden I woke up one day and said, hey, I've done this, I've done that. I think what happens in life, and I don't want to make this a philosophical discussion, is that when you are living history, you don't know it. After the Beatles, I went to do a story about the Warren Commission report on the assassination of John Kennedy, and went on to all these other stories. You don't know it. And I would say anybody listening in, I'd say when you're growing up, write it down. Keep a diary, even if you put in the bare facts, because you are living history. Every one of you, try and realize that. Why didn't I do more pictures with the Beatles? Because it was not very professional to say, hey, John, Paul, George, and Ringo, let's do a group picture. We have a group picture. It was very unprofessional to do that. And so anyway, so history is being made and you don't know it. And the Beatles didn't know it. Neil Aspinall said he was astonished with the reaction in America. Brian knew that success in America was the keystone to success everywhere else in the world. And he was right.
People who might not be aware should know that, yeah, you had this gig touring with the Beatles in '64, and there were times where you intersected after that, but you're a guy who, independent of the Beatles, witnessed an awful lot of history up close. You talk about reporting on the Warren Commission and the JFK assassination. You were in the room when Robert Kennedy was assassinated, and you were at ground zero a year later when the Tate-LaBianca murders happened, being the first guy out to Spahn Ranch, as we've talked about on the show in the past.
Yeah.
So you've witnessed plenty of history, and the Beatles was like some distant, happy thing that happened. But I could see where it would take a while to recognize the value of that, especially with the Beatles being an ongoing passion and love affair with the world 60 years on, that maybe it took you a while to recognize that.
You succinctly summarized my life in 30 seconds, because, I mean, even look at your life, and I don't know your huge history, but things happen when you get older, like I have. People pop up from all over the country. I got somebody wrote to me from Costa Rica and said, I just read the book and I loved it, and our paths crossed in blah, blah, blah. And people stop you in the street and say, I mean, it's ridiculous. Remember me? No. Well, you gave a speech on the Beatles at the Camarillo Library. Oh, yes, of course I remember you. It's like, and the older you get, the more people you have to remember. And the older you get, the more people you forget to remember.
Now imagine being Paul McCartney or Ringo.
Oh, don't even go there, because Paul McCartney, I don't think Paul can go anywhere. And Ringo, well, I mean, Ringo is so recognizable. I mean, Ringo looks terrific. Paul looks pretty good. I mean, Paul looks more of his age. But who doesn't look more than his age, right?
I was a fan of lots of people, so I kind of get it. I'm also very happy that songs that I just wrote originally just to make some money. No, that's how people start. You start out, you love what you do, but you're trying to pay the bills. But the fact that these songs then get into people's heads and they have this meaning, I mean, that's the biggest bonus you can have. It's true.
So it is fascinating to read this book because there was the earlier edition you did. Was it 10 years ago that the first version came out?
Yes, it was 10 years ago, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
you've so fleshed it out. You've done like all this research. So it's like you've taken your story of being on the road with the Beatles and now fleshed it out with a lot more detail and research that you've done, bringing in other people's stories to sort of fill the void where you weren't actually in the room. And it just makes it that much richer of a read.
Well, for example, I talked to Sting and I got a chance to ask him. Elton John's songwriter, Bernie Taupin, talks about every one of these stars talks about the influence that the Beatles had on their lives. Mm-hmm. There's nobody who really was not touched by the Beatles, not moved by the Beatles. So it's such a huge picture. And the amazing thing is, as you pointed out, Robert, is the beat goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you remember at what point you got a sense back in the 60s after you'd done this assignment and gone back to England that maybe this has got some staying power that we're going to be talking about this a long time from now? Or did that not occur till much later?
I must admit it did not occur till much later. Because as a journalist, as you noted, I mean, next year I went with Ronald Reagan on the road or with Bobby Kennedy on the road. You know, you're living as a daily newspaper man. Once today's story is over, you forget about it and you move on to tomorrow's story. Mm-hmm. So when you get older, you get a chance to evaluate your own lives. I think all of it, you included, you look back at the opportunities you missed. You look back at the things you should have capitalized on. But this is life. And so it took me a long time to realize that the Beatles was an incredible chapter in history and it happened to be part of segment of my own history, and that's why it took me so bloody long to get off my backside and write something.
Well, it's kind of like what you talk about in the book, going to Liverpool, and it took the city a long time to recognize what a valuable thing we have here in celebrating the Beatles. Decades went by before it's like, oh, maybe we should commemorate this.
Do you know something, Robert? That is so perfect, because the first time I went to Liverpool after the Beatles, they were a kind of a blip. You can't believe that there was no statues there. Somebody said, oh, yeah, they did pretty well. I mean, this had to be 20 years ago. So even Liverpool took 30 years to realize the gems they had in their midst.
Right.
Now, I'm going to Liverpool for Beatle convention at the Cavern and all the rest of it in August. And, you know, when I went back last time, good old Frida was there. Other great guys from Beatle eras were around, and the Beatles were everywhere. But when I first went back to Liverpool 30 years ago, they were barely a blip. I mean, it's hard to believe, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Right. Yeah, things have turned around.
On the banks of the Mersey, there's even more wailing and howling on the pop scene than usual. The Cavern Club, famous as the birthplace of the Beatles, is coming down. True, they're building a new cavern across the street, but it's not the same, is it? Even the Beatles aren't the same, are they? And that dark womb-like room, jumping with the Quad's loud cries, has gone forever. When Beatle Ringo Starr tried to save his old home, all he got was a 5-day reprieve. And an offer of free bits of the old days, a souvenir brick for the asking, met with a loud yawn. Yeah, but that was yesterday, man, and that's not where it's at, is it?
Speaking of people connected with the Beatles, did you know Tony Bramwell?
I didn't know Tony Bramwell very well, mainly because on the road, I never saw him. I think Tony was very involved, and you tell me, with the Apple stuff. And didn't he write a guy that wrote a book about the inside and knew what was going on inside?
He did, yeah. Magical Mystery Tours. And
yeah.
He was another guy that was connected to them sort of pre-fame, back when they're still playing the Cavern circuit. And, of course, he just passed away.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you'd ever crossed paths with him.
No, I never crossed paths with George Martin until 25 years ago, or 20 years ago, when he came out to California and conducted the Santa Barbara Symphony Orchestra, and we got a chance to talk, and then we talked about some of the old stuff, and George Martin was also a genius in his own right because, as you know, and as your listeners know, and as Beatle fans know, he brought the extra magic to their recordings. I remember when he started putting in symphonic music, and the Beatles kind of scoffed at him, said, what are you doing, the violins and all that stuff? And George Martin's production magic was incredible.
Right. They had this fear of Mantovani being applied to their music.
Yeah, there you go, Mantovani. I mean, Mantovani was kind of treacly music, for those who don't know. It was kind of, I can't even, what would the American equivalent?
Maybe like Lawrence Welk or something. It was
Lawrence Welk. Oh, yes. Perfect. Lawrence Welk was schmaltz.
Right.
Lawrence Welk was absolutely, schmaltz is a Yiddish expression meaning fat, a bit rich, a bit overdone, a bit overblown.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Lawrence Welk.
Yeah, it was interesting to read in your book that you relate the conversation where you just casually bring up Fifth Beatle, and he's like seething at that.
Oh, because I think he'd been asked the question so many times, and he got PO'd, and he just said, let's get on with this conversation. No. The only time, it was very charming and delightful in Santa Barbara, California, when I actually got a chance. And he wasn't really on the tour. He wasn't at the Hollywood Bowl, but I think he and some of the engineers and all the guys took the Hollywood Bowl music and cleaned it up.
Yeah.
Because as we all know, the sound systems were appalling, absolutely appalling.
Right. And you describe in detail that just for something so important, how casually it was handled. Mic cords getting kicked out and just stupid things like that you wouldn't do today.
Yeah. Yes.
What's that?
Never seen it, but still made up by Alex. Screw up about half. How'd you tune it? And this is the mock-up on the two-sided bass rhythm mock-up.
What? It looks like let's give him £500,000. It looks a good idea.
Yeah, two-sided bass rhythm
let's
mock-up.
give it him just for this. I'll put it on show.
Mal Evans, that would have been somebody you would have seen a bit of, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, Mal was an affable bear of a man. I'd say the Beatles provider. Neil had the money if the Beatles ever needed money, which they never did, or they went shopping. Neil Aspinall, who went on to become the boss of Apple Records and died, unfortunately, too young. But Mal was kind of a genial giant. He was the heavy lifter. And you've got to realize that when we went on stage, see, I'm starting like I'm a member of the Beatles. When the Beatles went on stage, I mean, I saw Big Mal lifting the box speakers and plugging them in for a large stadium and then unplugging them and making sure that all the musical instruments were gathered up when the Beatles left the stage. So Mal was there. Mal's family, in that terrific book by Kenneth Womack, Mal's family, in a way, complained. He ignored the family, and his family was the Beatles. He spent more time worrying about the Beatles than his own kids. If his own kids are listening in, I'm sure you'll concur because this is what I read.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I think they're in a more celebratory mood these days because of the book and getting the honor for their father. As much as he was not around for them as a family, at least his place in history is secure.
Yes, that's right. I mean, that's what everybody wants, their place in history, I think. And Mal is getting it in Ken's book. And it just is a great read, one of the best reads I've had in the last 18 months. So and there's a lot of new books coming out all the time.
Right. Did you know Ken Mansfield?
No, I did not know Ken Mansfield. The name is familiar. And I think, is Ken still around?
He just passed a couple years ago.
Okay, so these characters, Ken Mansfield and the guy you mentioned earlier,
Tony,
weren't actually on the tours that I was on, and they were sort of in-house people who were very close to Brian and to the Beatles.
Yeah, I thought you might have known him because he was based in L.A. for a while during the 70s when he was.
I didn't. I mean, the only people that I ran into in the 70s were people like Peter Asher lives in California. Run into him quite a bit, and he's still going strong. And I always think the interesting Jane Asher chapter. I'm looking for Jane Asher to write a book. I'm still waiting.
Good luck. Yeah. Well, talking about L.A., and we mentioned in passing the fact that a couple episodes you've been on the show, most recently after the Tarantino film came out, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yes.
And you have this very solid connection and a couple books, one that came out back when the trial was in progress and another one revised later on the Manson case. But you've got another book out now that's getting lots of attention. Nothing whatsoever to do with the Beatles and only connected to Manson in that it's true crime. You want to talk a bit about that because that's something that might be of interest to the readers.
I mean, to be honest with you, I know I'm doing a lot of marketing. You have to, I mean, when you bring a book out, you have to do the marketing. You have to get out there and sell it. Well, my new book is a book that has taken a long time to come out, like the Beatles book. It's about my friend, the Malibu murderer. Now, when I knew him, he was a good friend. We liked him. We liked his son, who played in the same soccer team as my son, same age, 8 years of age. And he was arrested for the murder of his stepson, the same age as my son, aged 8, and his wife, his second wife. And we lived with him in Malibu. He was my soccer coach. And we thought this was a man who was wrongly accused. And we went to the trial, and lo and behold, Fred Rayler was found guilty of the murder, sent to prison without possibility of parole. And Sally, my late wife, and I decided we would write a book which would obviously find him innocent. Well, we investigated over 18 months to 2 years and discovered that he was as guilty as hell and that he was a con man and he had fooled us. And the friend we thought was a good guy turned out to be a bad guy. And in a way, this is every man and every woman's dilemma. How many people, I would say, Robert, are there people that you knew who disappointed you when you learned the true nature of them?
Oh, sure.
Are there?
Not quite on this level.
Yeah, so, and no, to this extreme that, you know, you went out and we went to bat for him. I testified at his trial, what a great guy he was. He was still convicted. And it's, again, a personal lesson in judging people. Most of us want to see the nice side of people we know, friends we have, and we are sometimes turned on our heads to discover that the good guy is really the bad guy.
Did you discover this during the trial, after the trial? At what point did you come to recognize that he was guilty of what they convicted him of?
Well, without going into the great details of the story, Fred Rayler was convicted of murdering his second wife by drowning and his stepson by drowning and collected $750,000 in life insurance. Wow, that's a lot of money to have on a kid, 8-year-old boy, and your wife. And then when we investigated, we discovered that Fred Rayler had a horrible history of having terrible things happen in his life, collecting for the insurance on it. Not murder, a burnt car, which was a bit dubious, a burnt boat, a burnt guest house, and each time he benefited by an insurance claim. Not big money, but good money. And then all of a sudden...
But it's a pattern.
All of a sudden, his wife and stepson die. He gets over $750,000 for it. And then we looked into the death of his first wife. First wife died of drowning. Terrible tragedy. Second wife died of drowning. Coincidence? Or does something stink in the hills of Denmark? I don't know. Anyway, so we saw a pattern of somebody who had used insurance claims, and this was a natural progression. And as I say, he wasn't convicted or charged with the murder of his first wife, but it does seem odd that one man marries twice and both the wives die of drowning.
Right. Absolutely.
Coincidence? You tell me.
Right. Wow. And the name of the book is?
The name of the book is The Devil in My Friend, The Inside Story of a Malibu Murder. And I must tell you, I'm very proud of that book because it took a long time to bring out. And it is so well written, exceptionally well written, mainly because my late wife, Sally, wrote most of the stuff. And she was the one that would say Robert was wearing a pinstripe suit with a green tie and a yellow ribbon on his hair. Oh, you know, she was the detail person. Uh-huh. I was the nuts and bolts reporter.
Right. Wow. Fantastic. So it's getting lots of attention. So
thank you for bringing that up because I'm very proud of that book. I'm proud of my Beatle book, but somehow this is even more personal because my wife is no longer with us.
Right, right. So yeah, it's a way to honor her as well. I did want to bring up, we touched on it a little bit before. Here we are. It was 60 years from the year of them breaking big in England last year, 2023, of She Loves You and the first 2 albums and all that stuff. And that's when they put out this John Lennon tape that has been brought up to speed with technology and with Paul and Ringo, and a little bit of a contribution from George on there, and Giles Martin producing and all that, and Peter Jackson making a music video. Yeah. Did you have any anticipation for this before it came out? And then what was your immediate reaction when you did hear it?
Well, my immediate reaction was Paul McCartney, master marketeer. Marketer, I should say. Paul McCartney, master. Paul McCartney, obviously, I don't know if he ever sleeps, but he comes up with these brilliant ideas. What a gem of an idea. And, you know, the story behind it, and using technology of today to bring back to life technology of yesteryear. That was my first thought. And then when I heard the song several times, I liked it. It seemed right. What John would have said, I don't know, because John was a cynic in the group. But as I said earlier, can you believe that not long ago, that song, an old song, was top of the hit parade? You would have laughed anybody out the room if they said, well, we'll bring back an old Beatles song X years later and it will be a hit. I liked it. What did you think of it?
It was something that took a little bit to grab hold of me. The first time I heard it, I thought, wow, is that all there is? You know, like Peggy Lee. But then I think part of what sold me was the 12-minute making of video. I don't know if you saw that one. And the first moment they played the isolation of John's voice from that terrible tape, that blew me away. That stopped my heart. It's like, wow, that sounds like it was recorded 5 minutes ago. It was amazing. They're bringing him back to life. Yes. And then when you saw the Peter Jackson video, it's the kind of thing where I think its maximum impact seems to be the first couple of viewings. And then after that, you might get a little bit more critical. But I think it sold the emotional tone of the intention, which is Paul had some unfinished business. He wanted to work with John one more time. And it's a celebration of friendship. It's ultimately, you know, this love. It could be toward a partner, but I think the way it's presented really speaks to the love they had for each other. And in that way, it's a gift to the fans. That's how I received it.
Well, you're being very generous. You're right. And as I say, all the elements you just described are absolutely spot on. Is it exploitation? I don't know. It's actually terrific. And the fact, as I say, that he can bring this back. And then we have, in today's world, as you know, Robert, a thing called AI. And look at what AI is doing already. Oh, my God. Don't even go there, because a brave new world, or a crazy brave new world.
Yeah, very much so. When you're bringing dead comedians back to life to comment on contemporary events.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to your point, maybe I'm being generous, and I think that that's the way you need to look at it, because if you want to quantify it as art, well, is this up there with some of the more enduring Beatles songs? Of course not.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know Ray Connolly personally, but I've had him on the show a few times.
Yeah, well, Ray Connolly is really a very expert, knowledgeable Beatle person. I worked for him when he was editor of one of the Melody Maker, or one of the British. I mean, I used to write from him from Hollywood. Mm-hmm. He used to get me to interview people in Hollywood. Like, I've forgotten some of the names. Yeah, Ray is a terrific writer. Wrote for, I think, the London Evening Standard when I was in England, and knows his stuff. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that it surprised me a little bit, and maybe just because this was still when I was in the cloud of awe of getting the song and the video and the making of and all that. But he's like, he loved the video, but he's like, this song will be forgotten in 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
well, what do you
think? Can't tell me wrong.
No. I mean, but don't forget, this song will be forgotten in 6 months, but it might come back 20 years from now. Right. Who knows?
When they remix it, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if you say to anybody, what's the best Beatles songs, nobody is going to say Now and Then.
Right.
Here and Now, whatever. Yeah, there you go. Now and Then, Here and There. Here we go again.
Once
I don't know, whatever it's called.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it does, when you've heard it several times, it does start to, repetition makes sense. So do you agree with Ray?
If I view it strictly devoid of emotion on compositional and recording basis, probably it's a bit slight.
Yes.
But watching the video, I'd say the silly stuff and the flying in the 1967 George and John alongside the contemporary Paul and Ringo, that got old with me pretty quickly. But I think one of the things that stayed with me the longest, there were two things actually. One was the 1995 footage where you see Paul and George actually playing the song, and they really are playing that song. And that was wonderful. And the other thing that moved me was watching Paul in the studio as the orchestra is recording their section, and you just kind of read his face like, yeah, this dream I had, it's coming to life. Yeah. And I thought that was a nice moment.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, and I don't think I've heard that discussed before. But to my memory, and you correct me if I'm wrong, when they came out with albums and new music, they didn't have music videos, did they?
You're talking about in the 60s?
Yeah.
Just for the singles.
Well, when you have visuals to go along with the music, I mean, when I listen to my granddaughter tells me about Taylor Swift and Orlando Dawn or whatever, I mean, all the names of the, and she says, you must listen to this one, Grandpa. So I go on to YouTube and I say, I like this lady who sings mournfully. I forget her name now. I mean, it's terrible, isn't it?
I'm with you.
So the music videos that come out enhance the songs.
Yeah. And there's definitely a risk of that becoming the mental picture. And there's something to be said for just hearing the music and creating your own meaning and experience just from the sound. I don't like it when videos are a little too literal or something that supersedes your enjoyment of the song because that's all you can envision after that. I mean, I must say, I cannot hear Ticket to Ride without envisioning the Beatles on skis.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and that wasn't meant to be a music video per se, but it's such a powerful visual
Yeah,
image.
and then what about, I can't remember, you're the expert on teaming videos with the song, but I mean, A Hard Day's Night, you see the film footage of them racing through the streets being pursued.
Yeah.
But in today's selling the song, they spend more money on the videos than they do on the actual recording. Maybe that's not true, but...
Well, not by much, but yeah, it's very much part of the record industry, such as it is today, infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's a marketing tool.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely, that's how you get your return, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, when my granddaughter tells me about somebody I should look up, the first thing I do is go onto YouTube and see, I don't just say, give me the sound, I see the video. And the videos are elaborate movies, mini movies.
Right.
I mean, all the ones that the hot ones, I keep bringing up Taylor Swift because I can't remember the rest of them, but there's so many of them. Anyway.
Yeah.
There it is.
There it is.
The music the crowd sings is the music that Liverpool has sent echoing around the world. It used to be thought that Welsh international rugby crowds were the most musical and passionate in the world. But I've never seen anything like this Liverpool crowd. On the field here, the gay and inventive ferocity they show is quite stunning. The Duke of Wellington, before the Battle of Waterloo, said of his own troops, "I don't know what they do to the enemy, but by God, they frighten me."
Something About the Beatles. Created and hosted by Robert Rodriguez, executive producer Rick Way, title song performed by the Corgis. Something About the Beatles is an evergreen podcast.